Hello. Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out to Flyleaf tonight and supporting your local independent bookstore, as well as these wonderful authors. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from Melissa B. Jacoby about her book, UNJUST DEBTS, How Our Bankruptcy System Makes America More Unequal, with Gene Nichol. Melissa B. Jacoby is the Graham Keenan Professor of Law at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A frequent commentator on bankruptcy and debt in national media outlets, she has published over 50 articles, book chapters, and op-eds. Gene R. Nichol is a law professor, commentator, and author. He was director of the UNC Poverty Center until it was closed by the UNC Board of Governors for publishing articles critical of the then governor and General Assembly.
You have to bring up all that shit?
Since 2015, his research has been supported by the North Carolina Poverty Research Fund. We hope you enjoy. If you didn't get a book before the event and you'd like to, you can pre-order a copy up at the front, and then we can get it signed in the after. So feel free to do that. All right, to these two. Thank you.
Good evening. This is wonderful, really wonderful. I guess the only thing that would be better than this is if the Tar Heels won the baseball game. I assume they didn't. I'm also certain that Melissa has no idea the Tar Heels are in the World Series.
Is this a roast? Is that
not on her radar screen, I'm pretty sure. But what a wonderful crowd! What a bunch of old friends and new friends. There's nothing like a room full of law professors to kind of set your teeth on edge. I will say this though, some will know that my attendance at law school faculty meetings is not the best, and so I haven't seen this many UNC law professors in 7 years. It's great to have you here. Welcome to Flyleaf, which is North Carolina's greatest bookstore. Probably shouldn't turn it into a competition. These are non-competitive folks. So let me just say, my favorite North Carolina bookstore. Also next door to my favorite coffee shop and kind of hangout place. So this is all real convenient, and I don't live far from here. So what a delightful evening. I should say this too. I'm usually out and about, and I don't get to stay this close to home. I would say this. I know they're out of books. I think the whole world is out of Melissa's books.
No, there's still a couple.
I would encourage you to order Melissa's book from Flyleaf. They'll get it to you quickly and right away. Amazon, I'm sure, has a lot of ways of doing business, and it's great to support Flyleaf. So I hope you'll do that. Like tonight's author, I teach at the UNC Law School. But unlike tonight's author, I'm not going off to teach at Harvard next year. I've never been invited. So we're not exactly running the same company. Melissa Jacoby, as a lot of you know, is one of the greatest faculty members ever to be associated with the UNC Law School. As that brief introduction of me hinted, I've been involved in a controversy or two in my time, and I'm occasionally asked if I've ever actually accomplished anything in the state of North Carolina. And so what I always tell people is, yes, I have. I brought Melissa Jacoby here. Actually, I brought a lot of people in this room here, but I think I'll stick with Melissa. Back in the day, I was thinking about this today, it used to be part of my writ to visit people's classes and to read their teaching evaluations. I could I can hardly even think of the fact that I used to be dean of the law school at Carolina. It just doesn't seem feasible. But I was surprised to learn in that assignment that the toughest, most demanding, most intellectually rigorous, most terrifying to unprepared students, the teacher carrying the highest and most unrelenting expectations was Melissa Jacoby. Great rigor can come in smallish packages. Her student evaluations were always worshipful, adoring, except for maybe 1 or 2 in 100, which I always thought came from male students complaining, she's too hard, she's too tough, which they didn't know was sweet, wonderful music to any law school dean. With this book, Melissa has done 2 things that I wouldn't have thought possible. First, she has made me want to read a book about American bankruptcy. No small task, that. And then second, even worse, she wrote a book about American bankruptcy law that I found I literally could not put down. If you hadn't read it yet, I think you'll reach the same conclusion. I've seen it compared sensibly with Matthew Desmond. For me, it also brings to mind Michelle Alexander. Heady but carefully deserved company. I used to think of Melissa Jacoby as Elizabeth Warren's student and later colleague, but now I'm come to think it must actually be the other way around. There's something magical about an immensely accomplished expert and gifted teacher and practitioner and advocate of reform, turning a lifetime's accomplishment to a crucial set of public policy questions and literally opening the eyes of all of the rest of us. Opening our eyes in a way that we can understand, but we can't in good conscience ignore. For me, that's the high water mark of academic achievement, academic scholarship. And thankfully, you'll learn she doesn't write like a professor or a lawyer. So you're in for a treat. Just a couple more words about unjust debts, and then I'll shut up and let you hear from the one we came to hear from. I was astonished by the breadth of the problems which she addresses. Melissa's book, I came to think as I read it, could have been subtitled How a Statute Came to Swallow the American Civil Justice System. The stories in here, old and new familiarities, you know them. Big Pharma and the Sacklers, Johns Manville and Asbestos, H. Robbins and the Delcon Shield, TWA, Johnson & Johnson, the Weinstein Company, USA Gymnastics, Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook families, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, my favorite, the Boy Scouts of America, not to mention Detroit and San Bernardino. Massive and pervasive problems. Problems that, as Melissa put it a few days ago in the New York Times, mean a system designed for restructuring the debt of financially distressed companies has become retrofitted for other policy problems, problems that it is likely unsuited for. I was going to talk a little more about that, but I happened to read the Financial Times this morning, which published the list of its best summer economics books. I didn't even know there was summer economics books, winter ones, so God knows what all I've been missing out on. But it's compiled by the chief economics correspondent, Martin Wolf. He writes this about Melissa's book. In this compelling book, Jacoby, professor of law at the University of North Carolina, shows how the bankruptcy code favors fake people, also known as corporations, over real people, especially relatively disadvantaged ones. As she notes, Artificial persons filing for bankruptcy, especially if they are bigger in size, are far less likely to encounter the value judgments that low-income individuals face, both during and after they file. More broadly, Jacoby's book shows that bankruptcy law is another way in which the United States is plutocratic. One of the prime justifications for bankruptcy is to help the vulnerable and the unlucky. In practice, it seems used to protect the powerful, including those responsible for serious wrongdoing, from being held accountable after all. It is a highly disturbing account, the Financial Times. So it's my great honor to introduce to you to my best colleague, Melissa Jacoby.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be Gene Nichol's best colleague who's sitting up here in these two seats. Thank you to my colleagues who are here. Thank you to all of my former students who are here. It is such a treat. And believe it or not, there are non-lawyers in the room. Quite a few I'm going to brag about. Some of whom are under the age of 5. I'm not going to use words like plutocratic.
Oh.
That's a Financial Times word. But and the book doesn't use that word. But I did appreciate it. I looked it up just to make sure I knew exactly. But let me just say, Unjust Debts, like I say in the first page of the introduction, it is a story of falling out of love with a law. And that was not enough to get it in the romance genre to some, to really print some copies. But it does have a big effect on how I wrote this book, because the American bankruptcy system, as a few in this room know, has shaped my adult life to a disturbing extent. It's changed where I lived, who I spent time with, what I talked about over and over again. And parts of this life were super gratifying. The people who work in this field so many are incredible. Some are in this room today. I value their friendship and having these professional contacts very, very much. People want to solve real problems in our world, and we're given a toolbox in the bankruptcy world in which to try to do that. A continuous source of our discussion is how to make it better, how to fix the problems. That honestly is one reason a lot of people end up getting together in some civic organizations that focus on this particular system. And yet, when push comes to shove, people who work within a system, understandably, for reasons that I would talk about even more with a room of only lawyers, there's pressure to really, you want to tweak things, but you're not going to blow up the whole thing. And I'm not saying you should blow up the whole thing either. I believe that bankruptcy plays a very important part in our economy, in our society. We put a lot of risk at the household level in this country. There's got to be a safety valve for that. It makes everybody better off, and economists say it, as well as a lot of people who have studied the system. And so there are these problems that I talk about that I think Nichol asked me questions about, and that you might want to ask questions about. And I've spent decades talking about them, and things get worse rather than better. And even when people have good ideas in academics, and some people, including in this room, have had amazing ideas, and while they've been, sometimes people have listened, they haven't acted. And so what I did was I wrote and published a book that feels like a betrayal to the community I've spent a very long time with. And that's for someone with my personality who didn't know I was thought of as being that harsh a professor and got a little upset when I found out. That's very difficult. And yet, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not about, first of all, I think the book tries to walk a line between being as respectful as possible to the very hardworking people and very smart people who work in the system. This is a book about structural problems. It's not a bad guy book. There are a couple bad guys, but often they're bad institutions. Something you can't just bad apple a problem and make it all go away. But really, the people who are most affected by this system aren't the people I've been getting together with to try to help talk about how we can make it better. Day in and day out, this system is having effects on race inequality. It's affecting environmental issues. It's being used to try to solve crises that are so far beyond its institutional competence that I wanted to ask some bigger questions about that and what the role is of bankruptcy in our broader legal system. So I had to figure out a way to write Unjust Debts in a way that would actually communicate with people who are not lawyers, and especially not bankruptcy lawyers, and cut through all the jargon. And while I can't get to the under 5 set in this version, I tried very, very hard to write more plainly and try to be engaging. And while I don't think I got 100% of the way there, I think I made some progress on that. But I also wanted to do that in a way that where I remained credible, not because if people don't like what I have to say in the bankruptcy world, I can live with that. But I don't want them to be able to say, she's just made stuff up, she's throwing flames just to get attention or just to sell books. Because that is not my personality, and that is not what I'm here to do at all. So I will stop there, and I'm just so grateful for you all coming out. It is such a treat to see everyone, and thank you.
So I'm just going to ask a couple or 3 questions or something, so I know everybody here has questions in mind.
I'm not calling on anybody unless nobody has a question, in which case.
I can point at people, and if you call on me, I don't have to answer it. So let's talk just for a minute about the very last thing you were talking about. That is the way you wrote this book. I've read some of your law review articles, and they're not like this book. This book is gigantically accessible and also really delightful to read. And I'm not saying your law review articles are not. They're delightful too.
Delightful.
But what I was thinking about, what I was wondering about as I read it, how did you get in your mind how you were going to construct this, how you're going to approach it? I know you said a little bit about what your audience is, but you must have gone through a mindset to conclude how you were going to put this on paper. Do you mind talking about it a little bit?
No, I'm happy to. There was trial and error, and then more error, and then more error, and then a little more error. I moved, this is cut and paste is your friend, moving things around to try different things. Having people tell you that it's just still not working is a good motivator. That you're sort of the way there, but you're not all of the way there. And so listening to when people tell you that is hard, but I kept being willing to try different things. I also knew, even though the new press is willing to have sort of more academic leaning books for the general public, I didn't want to write an argument theory book just on that. I was interested in telling stories and letting the stories help people see the issues and then try to explain the law around that. I guess part of it is, I guess probably everyone who comes to a bookstore likes to read books. And so I originally, some of those books that have really short sections, very elliptical sometimes they're described, I really wanted to write it like that. My editor was not having it. Not having it. And he was right. It needed more connective tissue. I was just sort of like, let them use their imagination. They're like, this is bankruptcy. This is really hard. You can't just imagine it. So there was a lot of, I'm serious, there was a lot of work to be done of styles I've seen that I really admire, but that weren't all going to work for this project. But the stories became important. I also, nobody wants a memoir about me, and this is not that, but I do think personal stories in books about complicated subjects can help orient the reader, I find, as a reader, and also just to show why I care. How'd I get into this mess? People wanted to know. I get asked that a lot, so now I've written down the answer. Here's how I got into this mess. I was at a TGI Fridays questioning my life the night before law school started, and I almost dropped bankruptcy class, and I don't know why. I went the next morning at 8 o'clock a.m., but I did, and here I am now. So it tells a little bit more, but not a lot more, just a little bit occasionally, just so you know there's a real person who's been watching some of this. But weaving all those things together took a long time. And I'm really grateful for the law schools. The law school has given me a lot of support, given me a lot of time to rewrite, revise, rethink, do more research, and I'm really grateful for that.
Another, not a related question, but another a little bit off the page question. Instead of addressing these bankruptcy arguments, which I find mesmerizing and depressing.
Now, did you say you found bankruptcy arguments mesmerizing?
Yes. Mesmerizing, it's like just debts. It's got a lot of different meanings. No, but there are a lot of law professors here. There's a couple of sentences late in the book in which you talk about the fact that you happened to take Elizabeth Warren's class, changed your life, literally. That's the kind of thing law professors probably like to hear on occasion. Don't hear it very much, especially when it's thought to be changing your life for the good. So I thought I'd ask you to expound on that a little bit, the Elizabeth Warren connection and the role she's had in your development.
Sure. First, could you show me your hand if you were one of my students? Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm so excited. I mean, I got to see all of you, but that's awesome. And now keep your hand up if I've completely transformed your life. No. There are only a couple of you that I've really warped to that extent, but
Jackie?
Jackie, it's never too late to come to law school. I'm your priest, yes. Honorary JD for you. Yeah, so here's the thing. Once upon a time, Elizabeth Warren was a well-respected law professor, but she wasn't the Elizabeth Warren that you've seen on TV, who ran for president, who was a senator, who tried to save the world in the financial crisis. She was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. I had no idea I was going to be an academic. That was not something that was ever discussed. I would have choked on my food if someone had suggested that to me. I was not one of the students who went to law school thinking of that. And immediately when she moved to Harvard, when she would teach contracts, people would line up to say, I want to be a professor. I can't even imagine that for myself personally. I wasn't that developed to know what I wanted to do at all as a law student, but I was open-minded. So I thought I was going to stay in Philadelphia. I was going to pay off all my student loans, and things would go from there. I'd work at a private law firm, and those are all good things to do. Paying off the loans still can feel very good. But I decided my third year when Elizabeth Warren mentioned, not only to me, but to several of us, hey, would you consider doing a bankruptcy court clerkship? I said, sure, why not? Hey, so here's something to apply to. Would you live in Chicago? I've never been there, but why not? The story goes from there. So the judge I ended up clerking for, that she admired a lot, the first judge I clerked for, Bob Ginsburg, a bankruptcy judge in Chicago, was then named to a bankruptcy commission created by Congress to study the system and recommend reforms. That's why I was thinking about reform so early. And Elizabeth Warren was named to be the reporter to sort of oversee that project and everything around it. So between Judge Ginsburg and my former professor, they enlisted me in this project, and things went from there. And as time was going on, we did that project, then Congress proposed some legislation that was not what we recommended, so then we were kind of fighting against that legislation. And then one day, it just turned out that Elizabeth and some other professors that I ended up working with thought that based on the work that I was doing, they thought I'd be a good professor. And I said, okay, like I'd been doing up till that moment, and I sort of did fall into it a little bit. And so I think that's enough. I think that's enough for now. I will say with now Senator Warren, it's been really surreal to watch a mentor go into a different realm like that, especially when there are so many now former students who also see her as the person who sent them on their way. But that's also really nice. I did recently have occasion to take Senator Warren's oral history for these archives that are kept about her contributions to bankruptcy law. So we had a nice walk down memory lane. She's going to turn the tides on me for a virtual event we're doing on July 1st. She's going to interview me, be like back in law school. So
it has flipped.
It has flipped, back and forth and back and forth. So that'll be interesting. I don't know what to expect really, but the relationship has certainly evolved over time, but it's been fascinating to watch someone that you got to know in a very different circumstance that become that prominent in the world.
So they haven't yet decided the Purdue case?
Any day now.
Yeah.
So the other law professors know this better than I do, but I think this week, Thursday and Friday are the days that the Supreme Court, quote, may release opinions. They only have, over 20 to get through in a couple weeks.
They don't work as hard as you do. So that said, why don't you explain to us what happened there, what's going to happen there, or what you think should happen there.
And so I have a choice?
Yeah, no. What you think should happen there. Let's concentrate on that one.
Okay, so this is a hard one because while I think I know what the law answer should have been, I don't think this was the case in which to decide this issue. I think it's really a messy context. I think they regretted taking the case based on, I've talked about this with some people in the room. The question, I think a lot of people know, is whether the bankruptcy of a company like Purdue Pharma can also protect the Sackler family from lawsuits against them arising from the opioid crisis. The issue is not for people who agree to enter a settlement with the Sackler family. We're all free to release our own claims. The issue is people who did not make that agreement. Now, a lot of lawyers say, well, it doesn't matter because their claims are pretty worthless. I've heard that a lot. And again, they might be closer to the situation. I don't know. However, I'm not sure I want to live in a world where other people decide that for me. If I have my own lawyer and I decide I want to pursue it, I just think that we could get a little carried away with that argument. So the question of whether you can force someone to give up their rights against a third party who has not gotten bankruptcy protection and maybe billionaires with assets hidden around the world, it makes a fascinating headline and a frustrating headline. I think that when push comes to shove, this case was way more, I hate to say it's complicated, because that's what lawyers always say when they're like, you don't want to hear about it, we got it under control. It's not a clean case for them to decide this issue, and the longer this goes on, the more I think they're going to either find a way to say, we're not going to decide this, or they're going to uphold it for pragmatic reasons. I guess we got a little bit of a hint. There are some bankruptcy lawyers in the room from an opinion that came out last week that was pretty pragmatic about the remedies for a non-uniformity issue. But if they were going to do it straight on what the law seems to say, I don't know why it wasn't out in March, April, May, 2 weeks ago. I really don't know what to expect, but I think it's possible. They have a very messy decision, keep it that where the deal will stand, but that is totally a guess.
Yeah, it's just simple like immunity, presidential immunity. And they're in no hurry, so why would they be?
Well, and I do want to say this is one reason that that immunity, there's obviously, well, there's time pressure there. Here, the money, the way that this will be, you'll see it in the press if the Supreme Court does strike down the deal, is we had billions of dollars lined up for opioid abatement and now it's gone because the Department of Justice interfered with our deal. That's what it will say. Now, it doesn't say that we could still give that money to help people with opioid abatement. We just choose not to. It's not going to say that. It's going to say we offered the money with these strings attached. It was this or nothing, and there's nothing. There are a lot of families grieving from opioid addiction and have lost loved ones who wanted this deal to go through. A lot of them did. They're just not all aligned on that. So it's messy in a different way, but I understand I think the parallel's there.
But you think, or am I wrong about this, that outfits that are not greatly in debt and are trying to avoid future liabilities, they're not a good fit for the bankruptcy system, right?
Well, I would say that. So we've got our basic laws. We got state law, we got local law, we got federal law. We got federal bankruptcy law. That's the emergency kit. It overrides a lot of other laws. So who gets to tap into that emergency kit? It's like the set of, I've been thinking about a leaf blower lately. I don't know why. But you say, okay, and then once you have a leaf blower, you say, oh, I could clean other things with this. What else could I do with this power tool? And you're not using the instruction manual anymore. You're just using it for a lot of things. It might be effective at some of those things. And you've gotten really good at using the leaf blower. But here, back to the legal system, is it appropriate to use this set of laws that's meant to be an exception, not the rule? How broadly should that apply, and who gets to decide? Because we don't let financially distressed families to decide, I want to protect my cousin and my uncle and others. We don't let average families say, I like the set of rules in bankruptcy better than what would apply. So I don't know why the biggest companies and the wealthiest people would get to do that either. That's what I'm struggling with. I know that there are some efficiencies that bankruptcy offers. Absolutely. And sometimes it works great for bondholders and other contract parties. You say, people are going to hold out forever if we don't have this leverage to say, just agree to if you all agree to this deal, we're done. If 90% of you agree to this deal, we can bind the rest of you and everyone's better off. And that's an important concept. Great for bondholders. That's part of the deal they sign up for. The question is for involuntary creditors, when do you get to do that? And who gets to outvote you? I mean, that's really the thing. One thing I worry a lot about is how much the people who, there can be people with very severe injuries who have really good cases for jury trials be outvoted for people with really unvetted claims. Because guess how many people there are in the world with claims that we don't know what they're worth? A gazillion. How many people are there with really strong claims? It's small. You can outvote them. You just have to find people who will sign up. Now, I don't mean to say I think there's a lot of fraud in the system. There are people who argue that. If anyone here represents insurance companies, I think some insurance companies believe that. But a long answer to your question, I just want to explain for everybody why we got the set of power tools. We're only supposed to bring them out some of the time. So we got to be selective about when we bring them out. That's how I try to explain it.
You got to think about power tools. So my last question, I promise. With personal bankruptcy, you document in strong detail, demoralizing detail, the racial disparity which results in that system, like it does in almost all other aspects of our economic and legal and educational lives. What are some of the things we could do to improve that, to diminish racial disparity in the personal bankruptcy side And y'all get ready with your questions.
Indeed, it do. So one of the most straightforward things you could do is right now there are two types of personal bankruptcy. There's one that's less expensive and faster and gives more relief. There's one that takes longer, is more expensive, and is more uncertain relief. That more expensive one does have some extra tools in it that can be used and that's useful to some families. But that choice is where a lot of the racial disparities come in, and African American families are disproportionately channeled toward the kind of bankruptcy that is more expensive, less likely to give debt relief, and study after study has documented there's all sorts of ways it cannot be explained by financial variables or frankly anything else other than race and where you live, which conflate. The policy decision then would be, this is not the only reason to do this, but it's consistent with other reasons to do it, to smush, that's a technical term, smush those two chapters right together. And a single entry and a more menu approach, if you need to work on saving your home, you could do that and the like. And it also just has to be way simpler because so much of the cost comes from it being unduly complicated. There are some economists at University of Virginia that have studied this that say we have no idea why there are so many forms for families in such distress. It is cost upon cost upon cost. It is just deterring people from the relief that they need. That does not put money in the hands of creditors. That does not help them start a new business. That does not help them go apply for the better job, etc., or send their kid to school and whatnot. So simplifying, I know that's often the answer, but there's a proposal for that that's really on the table that's been introduced. It's not the only proposal you could use, but there is an answer to that question. That is one of the most fixable things. And we have some track record to say these things can also be bipartisan. This doesn't line up the same way as a lot of other issues. In 2019, Congress passed a new small business bankruptcy law for Chapter 11. All indications are that it's working very well. Passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support, fixed a lot of the complexities in the system, trying to make it cheaper. Is it perfect? Of course not. But it can be done. So some of the structural issues we can't fix through bankruptcy. We can make bankruptcy stop piling on and making everything worse.
Okay, so let's open the floor. We got a lot of folks who I think will have questions to ask. I don't think you need a microphone. You can just kind of stand up and belt it out if you would. My only advice is let there be an interrogatory as part of the question. I think that's usually a good thing, along with the speechifying.
And someone always has to go first, but Nick already went first, so you're not first.
That's right. So,
Elizabeth.
Yeah. So, you spent your whole life on bankruptcy, and
so did you.
And seen its flaws, and maybe become disillusioned. If you were a torts professor or a litigator, would you be writing this book from that perspective? I mean, is bankruptcy unique in some way, or is this across the board really in the law?
So I agree with the tenor of, I think, Elizabeth Gibson's questions, which is, aren't we all just on a path to disillusionment? Is that? Oh, yes. Yes, I've been doing some of this crossover work. I used to do some work on medical debt and bankruptcy or hospital billing and bankruptcy, and then I'm also just working on some of the mass tort stuff, although not as brilliantly as Elizabeth Gibson has. Anyone work on this issue, please read everything that she's written. Because if everyone had acted on her critiques, we'd be in a different place. But I am amazed by the optimism of torts professors based on that one conference, that they could get together year after year and see the problems that we're looking at from another lens and still want to keep going. I find that about a lot of my bankruptcy colleagues, and maybe you do too. They don't get stopped short quite the way that I did. So part of it might just be me. But I agree with you. one of the reasons I am interested in talking to some lawyer groups, and I'm going to see some alums in Charlotte on Thursday with Professor Lisa Broom, so really looking forward to that, is I do want to talk about some similarities and things that lawyers from across different fields might be experiencing. So for example, on very big Chapter 11, the big business cases or big nonprofit cases, most of which are done outside of North Carolina, so we're not talking about North Carolina lawyers so much at this moment. There is tremendous competitive pressure based on the way that big firms are structured now to be to market themselves as being super aggressive. We will push the envelope harder. We will make the more robust arguments. That's not, so I certainly see that happening in big Chapter 11 cases, but no way is that unique to the bankruptcy world. And then, so, that's just an example.
I'm glad you're going into Charlotte with Lisa, because I find Lisa doesn't really know anything. She's not a serious.
He's kidding for everybody in this room who's not a lawyer. You probably guessed that.
Lisa's the smartest person in the world and the most
See, if she was
serious
sitting up
person.
here, she would be his favorite person. He's already slipped.
Lisa brought me here. I didn't bring her here. So. Questions? Oh, come on.
Oh,
Yeah.
I will.
Grace.
First, I will just say that you can joke as much as you want, but as a student of Professor Jacoby's, I think I speak for many of us that your scholarship and mentorship and who you have been as a teacher has shaped many of our careers and the way that we think and problem solve. So,
Revealed.
my question is, we talk a lot, there are big names in bankruptcy that fit into this bucket of maybe, mission drift of the bankruptcy code. And we see those in the news a lot. And I've been thinking a lot lately about private equity and the abuse of the bankruptcy system and the way that that has evolved, not just in these single cases that are earth-shattering for people and systems, but in a systematic way. And I wonder if you could reflect on what you're thinking about as it pertains to private equity and its use of the bankruptcy code.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, the role of private equity in bankruptcy, and that's one that Senator Warren is right on in terms of healthcare, and I think maybe they'll look at I don't know, but it's a big issue in the newspaper industry and others. I talk about it a little bit in Unjust Debts. I don't make it a focal point, in part because there are some great books for the general public about private equity already that I think do a good job talking about the way that companies are made more lean, i.e. their assets are stripped out, and then they have to become more efficient, so people lose their jobs, and then it still doesn't work, and then they get into bankruptcy, and only their existing lender sort of has sort of a stake in everything and controls what happens in that case. So there's one chapter in the book that does focus on that. It doesn't limit that inquiry to private equity. I do think there's a question. I always want to say, like any financing method can be done well or badly. I teach secured transactions, and so I think about the role of sort of a lending transaction that has collateral in it. Well, that has changed our world in many ways for the better, but if you used a business, if all the assets of the business are the collateral for a loan that that you don't even make a down payment on, they're really in a vulnerable position. We don't want households to do that, and so it's not great for companies either. Some people are profiting a lot from that model, and so I think the question is, when Congress tries to intervene with this, as they sometimes do, finding the right balance, because I think that it's also a very powerful lobby, but there's also, maybe there is a balance, because you can't, I don't know if it's the whole model or just certain elements of the model that really create the problem, but certainly private equity is a big component in business bankruptcy now. One thing that I've really noticed is that, or just privately held companies generally, once upon a time, a company couldn't get bigger than a certain size without taking the company public. And then there are all these disclosures, and then the Securities and Exchange Commission is watching you, whether well or badly, I'll leave that to you, but when now you have so many pools of capital that can take public companies private or keep companies growing and stay private, we know so much less about them than we otherwise would. And if they're going to internalize all the costs of their business, I guess that's fine. It's none of my business. But if there's going to be harm that's imposed on other people, then that's a different story. And then who's holding the who took the money out of the company? There's a real question. There is jargon for that. It's called potentially fraudulent transfer. But those lawsuits are very difficult to win. So thank you for your question, Grace. Kate.
Can you talk a little bit about why you think that there's so much shame and stigma for consumer bankruptcy filers, and it's almost the opposite for business bankruptcy? There's some kind of expectation, or I don't know, more people want to get involved, and they want to associate their name with bankruptcy, and kind of sort of why that's happening, and if there's anything in the law or the narrative or something that to change that balance a little bit.
Yeah, so why are fake people and real people so different in bankruptcy? And I use fake people because it's shorter for corporation, but because a lot of business associations, I don't mean it necessarily pejoratively. Fake people have a lot of rights in this country.
No. I didn't think it was pejorative at all.
It's shorter than artificial. See, I'm trying to keep it simple here. Artificial is a lot more syllables. So some of it is baked into the law and some of it is in our society. I think we know it from, think about in response to the financial crisis, banks did get bailed out. Families who were encouraged to borrow money against their homes and told that the interest rates were all going to work out and it was all going to be okay, probably could have kept their home if the interest rate was readjusted so that they could be modified that way, maybe not even change the principal necessarily. And there was a huge blockage to that, to say, how dare we change contracts? And these families brought it upon themselves, but also the narrative of, well, you're paying your mortgage, why shouldn't your neighbor pay theirs? So turning people against each other. I'm not an expert on solidarity and some of those other debates that are going on, but we see this over and over again, that people are supposed to take personal responsibility for even when structural things happen to them. I don't know the underlying psychological explanation, except that I think it's been inculcated in us through a lot of means over a long period of time. But I do think it's there, and I think it's quite pervasive, and I think it blocks what what economists say would be a more efficient and better for everybody forms of debt relief. And it's not economic efficiency that's blocking those arguments. It's some finger wagging and the morality element of it.
Yes. Hey.
So I have two questions. First, are there questions at the end of each chapter that readers will be expected to consider?
No, Eric, but I have a list for you that I've prepared especially.
Just like every nightmare I've had. Think of it as a writer. I imagine you could have written volumes of this, right? I'm curious, what was the idea or story or structure that was the hardest to weave on the cutting room floor? Yeah, I think Eric's question is a great one, because I think one critique of many that I could get is there's a lot I don't talk about here. And it was a little idiosyncratic what made it in terms of the stories of what I had spent time on over my career, and especially in the last 10 years. So I don't talk about international cases at all. I don't talk as much about forum shopping as this book could, although it's implicit in parts of the discussion about how big companies can basically file wherever they want in the whole country or in the world, Singapore, the UK, Canada. In fact, lawyers around the world are eagerly watching what the Supreme Court does in Purdue Pharma, because if the Supreme Court restricts companies' rights in America, there are lawyers who are ready to take those cases and find an argument for why they should be in Canada, Singapore, UK, elsewhere. So that could have been a discussion. It's just not something I have focused on as much. I tend, when I dig into when I've done case studies
I really dig in. So when I studied the Weinstein Company, I learned a lot about the history. I mean, again, private equity firm owned by private parties, so there's not a lot of public information, but I pieced together so much stuff. And ultimately, I couldn't use most of that for this book. That's just so I had to restrain myself, and others also participated in restraining me. You can't put all this in the book. But I did have a goal of this. This book is actually even longer than I was hoping, but that's only because I wanted there to be a lot of spacing and big margins, because with a dense subject, that increases readability. So I showed them a model of the book that I wanted it to look like. That ended up making it a little longer. But I did prioritize not having the spin. Well, it was one of their books I pointed to. I said, I like this. You have to pick the right person.
They must have thought you were really good. That's all I'm saying.
Well, they didn't concede on many other things, so they can give me the font. Please just give me the font. So it was a balance between I do like to have all the details, and yet I had to give up. That would not have worked here. So that's a real struggle. Thanks, Eric.
Can you, in very general terms, give us a sense of the details that you left out?
That is the best question I think I've ever. Oh, well, and I have some law review articles I can send you. I'm not even joking. And the footnotes are incredible. They have all the details. So basically what I did for the Weinstein Company is I listened to all of the hearings of the whole bankruptcy, but I went back and collected as many primary source materials as I could. And I read a lot of the financial press and the entertainment press, which is so fantastic. The Hollywood Reporter is a really good magazine. They really are. They have lawyers on the staff and everything. I'm not on the staff, but some of the journalists. What I write about in some of my other work is there's the narrative of the Weinstein Company was a really healthy, robust company until Harvey Weinstein got found out. Is not true. The Weinstein Company was always very volatile, always had a lot of financial problems, invested in all sorts of things, really didn't have good corporate controls. This was not the book, though, to get into that. But I'd be happy to share I have published some other work on that, that I couldn't let it all just be in my extra text file, hopes and dreams. All the academics in the room have an extra text file, hopes and dreams, I think. So, is that the kind of detail you meant, or something else?
You can choose.
Okay.
Want more detail?
Sure, of course.
So you weren't worried about being sued for libel or anything like that, or?
Taking my temperature now. No. So this book was fact checked by me and two other lawyers and law students. I keep records of absolutely everything. So there's on the Weinstein Company, I can't imagine why they mess with me. They're gone. But I'm a very risk averse person after studying bankruptcy all these years, and I do really. I did think about it because they sue everybody, but. They're chasing, what's his name? Catch and Kill.
Ronan Farrow.
Thank you, Ronan Farrow. I knew Allison would know. So, no, do I worry about being sued? I worry about everything. But I don't think I should be sued for this book because I would work very careful.
Yes, sir.
The question I had is there's been a big focus on the accessibility of the text. What's the response been like for academics, legal scholars? I'm really curious to see how they've responded to the text being so accessible and focusing on that general public.
Oh, I am too. It's interesting. The book just came out last week. I did not, other than academics who helped me on this book, Donna Nixon, who so wonderfully gave me such great comments on the whole thing. Bob Lawless at Illinois, some others who read short parts. Michelle Dickerson at University of Texas. This book was not peer reviewed in the way an academic press would be peer reviewed. And so they don't have it. Now there was there'll be more academic, I'm doing a couple academic talks, virtual events this summer, and then some that won't be virtual, and we'll see. Most of what I talk about in this book does connect to my other research, so it's not out of the blue, but there is a question of how academics will take to it, and we'll have to see. It depends where they're coming from otherwise generally, but they weren't really in the same way. People in my field, while I hope that they do read it, they were not. I was really trying to think about people actually affected by this system, and so we'll see how that goes. I'll report back.
Yeah, you should report back, because I think that academics are marginally opposed to clarity and to precision and to brevity. So they won't like it as much as real human beings.
I believe that academics are people, just like corporations are people. I just want to say that Nick and I disagree on that. Carissa.
Fake people.
So I think I might also be disagreeing with Nick, but I'm not sure. Because I wanted to ask you a question. You talked about how difficult it was to craft a narrative that would appeal to people who weren't specialists. You talked about the challenge of leaving out all of the detail that you've learned. I have a question for you about sort of what we might call nuance, but maybe is better understood as hedging. How you talk to the media a lot, you write op-eds now, you wrote this book now. How do you deal with the fact that when talking to general audiences, nuance or hedging or acknowledging the complications seems at cross purposes with making the point? How do you deal with that? Can you help me? Give me a hint.
Oh, Carissa, it is so true. So nuance is very important to me. I don't like to overstate things. Needless to say, that makes it sometimes working with the press, including, say, essays in news media, a tussle. But it's an important tussle to have, but it's also important to say, I'd rather not publish it, or I'd rather not say it if I can't stand by it. Now, a lot of people don't do it that way, but that's where I come down. So I gotta be willing to walk away if I can't make it sound like me, and me has hedge in it. I'm all about, I don't mean that, I think hedging is important because the world isn't black and white. Now, as Carissa knows, I got this book contract without an agent. Carissa tried to help me get an agent. But you can't make an agent represent someone. It's not how the system works. So I didn't. It's interesting. I didn't have that intermediary on the front end when working on the book in the beginning or trying to sell the book in the beginning. But I think that's where some of these issues get worked out, sort of in communicating with with a publisher. But with the press, it does come down to working with people that you trust. And again, I'm going to say it again, willing to walk away and try to not get pushed to say things. Now, sometimes there's a way you can find a middle ground and I'm willing to try to do that, but I'm not willing to overstate something to get a quote.
I think that the book is full of nuance, actually, so that it doesn't fall into exaggeration or oversimplification. It's stylistically accessible in a different way, that maybe I should say. You know, there are introductory sections which will say things like, you'll remember that we talked about this 5 pages ago, and we did this, and we came, and it's obviously written in a way which draws people in, and which legal things are not typically, but even many authors are not accessible in that way. So I guess what I was trying to say is I think had a plan for accessibility, which is different than through oversimplification or something like that. I think it was very successful. I think it's going to be a terrifically successful book because it's surprising to have a book about bankruptcy which is sophisticated, is not oversimplification, but also is kind of delightful to run through.
Delightful. You heard it. But so this is, I know we're getting the signal that we're getting at time. This is a good place to say again, it really takes a village to write the book that you want to write. I refer to a variety of help I've received. Editors make a huge amount of difference here in terms of also even late in the process, too late in the process for my comfort level, but that editors saying you need to make, someone's not going to remember that from 3 chapters. Can you refer back to that person? Can you make those connections? So other people who do look at it, again, preferably not from your field, preferably not from the legal world if you're trying to reach other people. So yes, it's overstated, but the village is real for producing this kind of work, even for not a scholarly audience, and perhaps especially not. So I think with that, we turn it back over.
Please join me in thanking Lee.
Thanks, everybody. I will set you loose. If anybody wants a copy signed, we can do that up at the table and the table at the back again. So I'll probably try to clear some chairs for y'all. Otherwise, remember you can order at the front.
And if anyone didn't say hi but doesn't have a book, please come say hi to me anyway. I want to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm looking forward to reading it every time July 4th holiday.
I've heard some people are using it every
All right, and I'll take this.